All systems imply the end of the system, and we start with the unconscious whole. All systems exist in language and emerge into consciousness through language, whether it's mathematical, geometric, color, sound, touch, or a given language, as in English, which we're speaking now. Everything that's conscious is contained within a system, and the system leads inevitably to its own end. And the best way to explore this in a visual sense is geometry. You can think of a system as a given angle, because a value is an angle of approaching the one, the whole. So if you pick a given vector or angle and just follow that angle through, it eventually returns to the place that it begins from the opposite direction. Even if you take the metaphorical totality, the sphere, and take it into its two-dimensional form, the circle, when you set out, all straight lines carried to infinity eventually curve round and come back to the beginning. Now, everything is a system, and its opportunity is consciousness. Its path is determined by the laws of the system, and if followed through to integrity, or if followed through with integrity, it will come back. This is a system of right angles. It will come back to where it began. If you take any law and apply it with integrity, it returns to its source. And the gift of a system, which has a process of birth, you have the starting point, the moving away from the starting point, the continual moving away from the starting point, and the return to the starting point. Now, complex systems, 200 million point systems, 500 billion point systems, have a very long journey and will cover more of the sphere. So the more complex the system is, the greater the conscious territory before the return. The simpler the system, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Physics teaches us that no energy is created or destroyed. It simply changes. The birth of one thing is the death of another. The death of another is the birth of yet another thing. It forms a circle. Of course, there isn't just this point of birth and death unless you have a very narrow mindset. There's the before birth, being born more fully, the developing, the maturing, the dying, the death, the after death. It can be broken down, this continuum, this circle can be taken into as many distinctions as you wish. You can take a clock face and interrupt it with 5-minute increments and hour points, or you can increment it, can break it down into microseconds and microseconds of microseconds and microseconds of microseconds of microseconds. But eventually it goes through to its completion. And in this way, every system justifies and determines its own demise. Every system is flawed. Every system is false, because every system is a lie in that it omits the space, which is always the largest part of a system. There may be a space between the first second and the second second, and a space between the second second and the third second, as a watch hand revolves through its system. But the largest portion of any system is the space in between the points in the system. Now, that space, in some sense, diminishes the more complex the system. If we have a system with, for example, in the color system, we tend to think of primary colors. A screen on a TV is broken down to 3 or 4 colors, with pixels determining the density of the system, the realism of the system. It's a very crude system. It's easy to see through the system. There's not a lot to hold you there. Very complex systems have a lot to ground to, a lot to point awareness to. And there's the system of thinking, which is the system of language, and the systems of relating all the different words to all the different words, to relating all the different thoughts to all the different probable and possible thoughts. But it is ultimately a system. The conclusion, the successful conclusion of any system is the liberation or the transcendence through the system from the system. Every system liberates one from itself through the process of going on a journey that ultimately counteracts the starting point. The starting point comes in here. The end point is coming at that same point with its opposite. So paradox is the gateway of transcending any system. How can the system be true if it says go this way and then go this way, but now it's coming back here from the opposite direction? It's now going towards rather than going away from, and from this angle rather than this angle. So you have a paradox when with even the simplest system. The line that travels around the circle or the sphere that comes back at the point from the opposite direction. The endless journey in a plane sets off here, takes you to the opposite side of the world, and then if it continues unwavering, takes you back to the beginning. In this way, every system has built within it its own liberation. Capitalism, built on a system of creating abundance and wealth for as many people as possible, leads to its own end. Communism, again, another system built on the idea of creating the greatest good for the greatest number, comes to its own end. Christianity, if followed impeccably, leads to the dissolving of the dogma of Christianity, because it's within the seeds. How can you be dogmatically Christian and follow Christian tenets when they take you into the domain of embracing every other faith and belief system and person in the world who is completely the opposite of you? So it takes you to the end. And one of the things that I most enjoy is the way that rational thinking takes one to the end, takes me to the end of rational thinking. Because every system has within it an intention, and that intention is furthered up to a certain point within the system. And then the system begins to hamper the intention that gave rise to it. And so at the top of the pyramid of any system is conscious, sustainable fun. It's the only self-referential loop. But ultimately it's more fun to transcend the system one uses to create conscious fun, be it in language, be it in mathematics, be it in this relationship structure or that relationship structure. The idea of pursuing conscious fun within a physical body. It's ultimately more fun to die and let go of the physical body that one used to explore a life. In this way, on a mathematical level, all points in the system are neutral. All points in the system are equal. If you pursue this system of this particular vector of relating to reality, it ultimately has no starting point and no ending point. And you go round, and you go round, until you wake up, until you transcend, until you become aware of something that exists beyond the system. And simple systems become more complex, and complex systems become yet more complex, until you reach the vector of consciousness, where consciousness cannot track the complexity of the system. And you're back at the beginning with a greater sense of appreciation for the infinite system, with a greater awareness of some of the possible landmarks on the system. And what we can see in our differences, if I'm going around the sphere in this form and you're going around the sphere in this form and someone else is going around the sphere in this form, there will be intersections of these systems. And some of these intersections will appear to be at odds with one another. If I'm going this way, the same way you're going this way, or at the same way as I'm going this way, we will be at cross purposes. And yet we're still traveling around the sphere, moving towards the ultimate goal, conscious, sustainable fun, which ultimately includes all systems. Which ultimately includes all the probable systems for delineating and articulating the totality, the sphere, until there is no sphere, until there's nothing to differentiate this point from this point, from this point, from this point. Because we become aware of all the space, of all the nothing that counterpoints all the things. And when you're aware of all the nothing and all of the things, there is no time, there is no space, there is no language. There is an interconnected whole, an interconnected ecology that identifies with everything that has ever been, that will ever be, that is, different points of the sphere. We come back to the One and know it for the first time. At the moment, we dissolve past the distinctions that allowed us to understand it through the lens of distinctions. And we return. And this is the liberation. This is the ultimate freedom, the ultimate fun.